Welcome to Lesson 7 of the Write Out Loud 101 segment, hosted by the Writers Lounge on Discord and the Writing Sessions 101, run by the professor. This is The Mermaid and the Pirate. The evening fog was so thick the pirate ship was forced to drop an anchor several hundred yards from its destination. The crew was beginning to get restless as this was the 12th day. They've been anchored to this point, and Captain Swift was running out of ways to distract them from trying to plan a coup. This was his ship and his dream. He wasn't about to let a less than mediocre crew change what he believed to be a predestined chain of events that would lead to his finding the Island of Whispers. Some call it a myth, a place where one of the more revered pirates to grace these seas, Damon Tally, hid his treasure. Others say you'll spend so long trying to find it, you start hearing whispers in your head, and madness inevitably creeps in. Hence the name, the Island of Whispers. Damon Talley was the only man who ever claimed to have been to and seen with his own eyes this place. Then again, he was deemed mad when he went to the gallows shouting for someone to find his treasure in the Isle of Whispers. As Captain Swift lay in bed restless, listening to the heavy breathing and snoring of his crew of 12 men below deck, he felt his ship, the Leviathan, rock slightly. If he had been if he had fallen asleep like he was supposed to, a subtle movement like this would have lulled him further into sleep. Instead, he jolted up out of bed and stood very still, listening. But the loud snoring below blocked him from determining if his ship was being infiltrated by his worst enemy, Captain Slade, who heard through rumors that Swift was on a mission to find gold he saw in his dreams. He laughed at the thought, but Swift knew he was desperate enough for a challenge that he intended on seeing for himself if this dream had any truth to it. Blasted crew, he shouted under his breath as he made haste to get dressed. If he was destined to die today, he vowed he'd always be fully dressed, with sword in hand, having fought the best he ever had. He wasn't called Swift for nothing. As he strapped on his trusty sword, around his waist and released it from its sheath, the boat rocked slightly once more. Captain Slade, I know you're up there, you rapscallion, he shouted to the ceiling this time, loud enough for his crew and anyone within earshot to hear, but the snores continued. He crept to the door of his cabin and looked through the small window, not seeing anything beyond a few inches, the fog concealing his view and any enemy who might be using it to attack should he take one step out his door. But he knew he had no choice. It was up to him to protect his ship and his slumbering crew to the death. So he pulled the door open and ran out several feet from his door, his sword out in front of him, the thick fog surrounding him. He knew if someone was out there, they had him at a disadvantage, having seen him run from his cabin. Show yourself, you son of a fishwife, he shouted, but no one answered. Swift, came a soft, angelic voice from the direction of the calm waters. Of all the oceans in all the world. He sheathed his sword and walked so swiftly through the fog it moved out of his way as he approached the side of his ship, looking over and down into the water. Mermaid, he mutters under his breath to himself, scrunching his nose in disgust at the sight of her. Mermaids are known for their ability to charm any man into open waters and ultimately to their death. However, Captain Swift has developed an immunity against them, so he neither desires nor fears them. What is it you want from me, mermaid? I am Melody of the Isle of... Oh, I gave it a name and I didn't put it in there. Sent by Vanora the Great to deliver a message to Captain Swift of the Leviathan. Please fetch him, slave, she answered, as she swam toward a rope ladder hanging off the side of the ship, preparing to climb on board. Wait, damn it, you can't board my ship. I do not give my permission. Your ship? Melody asked as she placed one leg over onto the deck of the ship, then the other. Her legs were still showing scales as the transformation took longer takes longer for younger mermaids who aren't permitted to walk on land until they reach their 14th birthday. Swift could tell her inexperience in walking by the way she stayed glued to one spot, once stepping onto the ship. He quickly calculated the time it would take him to grab her and throw her back where she came from before his crew discovered him talking to a mermaid. He was forced to put his plan on hold when she did take a step and began to stumble. He ran to her quickly and helped steady her by putting an arm around her waist. Vanora said I'd know the captain by his willingness to help a mermaid, even though he knows what we are. I must say, you don't look like the captain of this great ship. Well, just between us, it isn't as great as it looks, he replied, realizing she no longer needed assistance, yet was lingering closely for longer than necessary. He quickly let her go and took several steps away from her. While he's one of few who's able to avoid their charms and knows distance makes no difference, he has always felt being too close is harder for him to avoid their charms. So what does Venora want? Why do you not call her Vanora the Great, like all humans beneath her should? Only Mers are allowed to call her Vanora, and you are not Mer, are you? She asks, sniffing the air in his general vicinity. Perhaps I am not beneath her, he replied, but could not finish because the next thing he knew she had grabbed him around the neck and lifted his entire body off the ground. Mermaids, while fast swimmers, are just as quick on land, even the adolescents. How dare you say your life is equal to that of Vanora the Great? She asked, choking the life out of him from pure rage and anger. Melody, you can't kill me. Stop. He manages to choke out. She knows he's right and loosens her grip. He falls to the ground, coughing and hacking as he rubs where her hand just was, feeling the imprints of her fingers left on his neck. Why does she say you cannot be killed? Don't you know? He asked, still rubbing his neck, the bruising starting to show. I've heard rumors Venora loves you. What is love? Imagine my luck, a mermaid asking a pirate what love is. Love is when you see a man and don't wish to kill him or do him any harm. When Venora sees me, she doesn't want to kill me. She wants to kiss me. Enough, you have managed to corrupt her mind. You will not do the same to me. Just let me deliver this message and leave this vessel already, Melody replies, her face showing signs of utter disgust and unease at being near Captain Swift for so long. Temper, temper, Melody. Imagine if Venora the Great heard you accusing her of being corrupted by me. It would be you at the other end of a mermaid's grip on your neck. Venora wants you to know if you stay here any longer, you will go mad, Melody says, looking away from him just then, as if there's more to tell, but she's hesitant to go on. Is that it? I doubt Venora would send you all this way to tell me something I've heard all before. Out with it. Do you hear that? She asks, looking over her shoulder out into the fog. She squints her eyes to try and see into the distance as if she hears something out there, but it's no use. The fog is far too thick. Hear what? Is someone out there? Swift asks as he removes his sword from his sheath and readies it for battle. No. The voices. Do you hear them? I can't make out what they're saying. They're whispering, she says, her eyes widening with fear as she backs away from Captain Swift towards the side of the ship. Who are you? Venora was right. You'll die if you stay here waiting for a dream that will never come true. The whispers are coming for you, Swift. You're giving them exactly what they want. For your sake and the sake of your crew, leave. Leave now or perish, she says as she turns and with one jump leaps over the side, somersaults and dives into the water, her legs changing back into a fin right away. Wait! What do you mean the whispers are coming for me? He shouts out to her as she swims away faster than he's ever seen a mermaid swim before. Damn it, Venora, why didn't you come here yourself? Who are you speaking to, Captain? Timbers, his second in command, asks, coming up behind him and scaring him half to death. Timbers, what have I told you about sneaking up on me like that? And why aren't you asleep with the men below deck? I thought I heard voices, Captain, so I thought it best I investigate before rousing you. I wasn't to know it was you, was I? Who was you talking to? Not yourself, I hope. I've had a right tough time trying to get him to stay in spite of your strange dream quest, Timbers rambled on, not even stopping to take a breath. Dream quest? Is that what the crew's been calling what I'm doing here? Well, it's not some bloody dream quest, and you can tell 'em that direct from me. It's real, Timbers, it is. I can feel it. It's out there. Everything is going according to plan, Swift mused, closing his eyes for a moment and taking a breath in self satisfaction at knowing he's about to uncover one of the biggest mysteries in pirate history. He's going to find the Isle of Whispers and claim the treasure. Just then a bolt of lightning is barely seen in the distance, illuminating the night sky, which is helpful in being able to see through the thick fog they've been stuck in the middle of. Looks like a storm is coming, Captain, but I'm sure you already knew that. That is, if your your premonition is happening just like you said you saw it. Swift looked over at Timbers wide eyed, not knowing what to say. He had a dream about this place. The dream led him here and told him to wait. The Isle of Whispers would come to him, but it didn't tell him exactly how or when, or even more importantly, why. He's just as lost and confused as his crew, but he's the captain, so he must always at least look and sound like he knows exactly what he's doing. The lightning struck again, this time much closer to his ship as thunder began to sound in the distance, like a loud explosion in their ears. Just then, huge raindrops began to fall all around them, soaking them in seconds. They both ran for the captain's quarters and ducked inside, shaking off whatever rain water they could. Swift took his long hair that he keeps pulled back in a ponytail and wrung it as dry as he could onto the floor. Another lightning and thunder as the waves outside began to make the boat rock to and fro. "Rouse the men and hoist anchor," Swift shouted over another sound of thunder that felt like it was right next to the Leviathan. "Does that mean we're finally leaving this god-forsaken place, Captain?" Timbers shouted, holding onto the door of Swift's quarters, about to take his leave. "No, but I will not leave us sitting ducks while this storm passes through. We'll move as far out of its way as possible till it passes, then come back," Swift shouted just as loudly. He's knocked practically off his feet as he struggles to maintain balance. Books and papers and various objects he's collected over the years start to rattle and fall off shelves all around his room. "But Captain," Timber starts to argue, but is cut off by a lightning strike that has hit their topmost sail, setting it on fire. "Go, now!" As Timber runs to wake the men, most of whom already started waking at the sound of the first thunder, Swift sways over to his desk and pulls open a side drawer. In it he pulls out an ornate wooden box with a symbol on it of a beautiful mermaid. He opens the box and pulls out a pendant, shaped like the tip of a mermaid's fin, made out of a stone that is glowing a mesmerizing shade of blue and purple. He quickly puts it around his neck. This pendant was given to him by Vanora as a token of her affection for him. All of her most trusted mermaids are given this same pendant as a way to contact her if they are ever in need of her assistance. When Swift left Marinelle Bay, where Vanora and her mermaids live, he vowed to himself he would never use it. Little did he know he'd one day find himself wishing she were here, because other than her ability to lure men to their deaths, Vanora can also bend the weather to her will, and Swift needed her to stop this storm. He held the pendant to his lips, kissed it, and whispered, "Vanora," before he tucked it inside his shirt and made his way out of his cabin, careful not to fall over as the ship began to slowly rock back and forth against the waves. Outside his quarters, his crew was scrambling around the deck, slipping and sliding as they prepared to move the ship. Swift looked to where the anchor should be resting once it's pulled up and noticed several crewmen struggling to hoist it. He ran to them, passing Timber, who's wrangling ropes in both his arms, helping other crewmen steady the sails that are flapping unsteadily in the fierce gale winds. "Timber, get up there and take the wheel on this thing while I get this anchor up. Hold her steady. Help is on the way," Swift shouts into Timber's ear. For a brief moment both men look at each other, and Swift winks at him, giving him a sly grin. "Captain, not Vanora," Timber questions back. Swift pats him twice on the shoulder before going to his men to help them bring up the anchor. Timber releases the ropes that were wrapped several times around his arms and hands them over to the first crewman who comes running by. He then sprints up to the upper deck and takes a hold of the out of control wheel, trying with all his might to steady it as the water keeps rising around them, coming onto the ship in floods. Every few seconds, he's wiping his eyes to monitor the crew and make sure the captain doesn't get injured. He notices the anchor is finally back in its resting place. The captain looks overboard and waves furiously to something or someone Timber can't quite make out in the distance. Suddenly, the waves stop rocking the ship mercilessly, and the men who were struggling against the wind with the sails have all fallen on top of each other as it has suddenly stopped blowing as well. The clouds overhead are parting, and the constant heavy fog is also beginning to dissipate, but only slightly. Looking around them, the men can hardly believe they were just battling a raging storm. Vanora, Timber whispers under his breath as he lets go of the wheel and runs down to the captain, who's waiting by the rope ladder to help her on board once she reaches the ship. Captain, you can't seriously be thinking of letting her on this ship. The men don't take kindly to mermaids, you know that. Remember the time it took them to come back after the weeks you spent anchored just off the coast of Marinelle Bay? The men had some place to go then, Timber. Here they are stranded. Here they'll have to make do, Swift answers, putting his hand on his most trusted friend's shoulder, trying to reassure him. But nothing good can come of you summoning her here. She'll. Timber started to argue, but was cut off. I'll not have you speaking such things about a woman who just bloody well saved our lives, and you be sure to tell that to the men as well. Think what they want of her and of her kind, but do not let me hear their thoughts in my presence. Is that understood? Swift orders, waiting for Timber to nod his assent before releasing the now tight grip he placed on Timber's shoulder. Now go help the men clean this place up. I'll not have the future Mrs. Swift living in squalor. Timber's eyes widen with shock to hear the captain speak of marrying a mermaid, but they've been through too much together over several decades for him to let what he considers to be a phase come between them. As Venora's hand reaches up for Swift to grab a hold of, Timber takes his leave to gather the men and retreat down into the belly of the ship. You came, Swift said sweetly, a smile creeping across his lips as Venora stepped onto the ship. Her legs are still changing, green scales present on them. She's wearing a shimmery purple gown with spaghetti straps hugging her just right to accentuate her hourglass figure and large bosoms. Her long black hair with one purple streak running through it, even after just come out of the water, falls perfectly around her face. You called, she replied, kissing him softly on the cheek. That is what you humans like, isn't it? Touching, you call it? There are things we like more than a kiss on the cheek, he says, speaking softly and provocatively, since his men are nowhere in sight to hear him. Teach me, I want to pleasure you, she begged, unsure if she was speaking the right words to convey her thoughts. Stay with me and I will teach you everything you want to know. You'll go mad if you stay here, Swift, she replied, sounding genuinely concerned for him. Part of her hated that she was so weak over this human, but the other part of her that desired to explore her feelings was winning. For the first time she was following her heart, and organ mermaids were rumored never not to have. If you stay, you can make sure I don't, he reasoned, fully expecting her powers to be able to easily handle the possible turn towards madness. Not if I become less mermaid, she thought to herself, not wanting to leave him but also not wanting to worry him. You expect me to stay? How can Vanora the Great stay on a pirate ship? What will my Mers think? They'll think whatever you tell them to think, Vanora. Please, he continued to whisper, this time stepping closer to her. He put his arms around her waist and pulled her closer. She was weak against his will, but didn't want to pull away the way all Mers are supposed to. He leans in slightly and kisses her passionately, feeling her give in to him completely by the way she began to moan. He pulled away before they both got too carried away. I need you, Venora. He looks deeply into her eyes and knows instantly she's not going to leave. He takes her by the hand and leads her to his quarters where they make love to the sounds of waves splashing loudly against the ship, an unavoidable effect caused by Venora experiencing something she never has. In the belly of the ship the crew try to listen to Timber as he explains the captain's orders, emphasizing there was nothing to be concerned about when it comes to the captain's loyalty. It would always be with his men. It didn't help that Timber had to shout this assurance over the sounds of Captain Swift and Venora making loud, passionate love directly above them, so raucously the ship was rocking slightly. This sound went on all day, the captain not showing his face to the crew until nightfall, when the sounds of sirens rousing him and Venora, who were a tangle of naked limbs and sweaty sheets on his bed. "What the bloody hell is that?" he asked, sitting up in bed and covering his ears from the sound that's growing louder the closer it gets to the ship. "It's the mermaid call." "What?" He tried to shout above the sound, but found he had no voice. He opened his mouth to speak, and no sound came out. Whatever was approaching managed to silence him completely. Venora rose from the bed as if unfazed by the noise or what was happening. Standing naked in front of Swift, who was still aimlessly attempting to block out the sound, she grabbed his robe off the corner bedpost and flung it on in one motion. She walked slowly to his door, turning once to beckon him to follow her with her hand. He made to follow behind her, then stopped in his tracks, realizing he too was naked, but she was wearing the only robe he owned. He quickly put on the pants he was wearing earlier and followed her out onto the deck of the ship, where the sound was so loud he fell to his knees, clutching at his ears in agony. His crew scattered around doing the same. Venora walked to the side of the ship, and with her right hand stretched, she motioned it in a sweeping arc, and the sound suddenly stopped, leaving the men disoriented with a ringing in their ears. "What are you doing here? I ordered you to stay at Marinelle Bay and await my return. Why have you disobeyed me?" Venora asked, addressing her question directly to Melody. "We wish to know why Vanora the Great rushes to the aid of a man." Venora turns her body away and looks up at Swift, who's regaining himself and looks to be coming to her defense, but she stops him with a head shake. She knows a mer challenge is about to come. She's been ready for it ever since Swift swam, quite literally, into her life. Instead of killing him and stealing his soul, as she watched him drowning, her heart did something it had never done before. It skipped. Before she realized what she was doing, she grabbed him around the torso with one hand and swam to the surface with the other. They both were injured from the battle that had just taken place. Neither side was winning, but too many Mers were dying to allow this to go on. So Venora ordered a retreat, leaving her behind with Swift, who was dragged overboard by a Mer just as his ship was sailing away. He was beginning to get heavier in her arms as she tried to hold his head above water. She did not have enough energy to get him to land, which was several hundred miles away, but she found a piece of wood off the side of his ship that broke off earlier floating by. She hoisted his body onto it, and together they stayed that way for several hours until she regained enough energy to take him to the nearest shore. "Venora, I challenge your right to rule over the Mer of Marinelle Bay," Melody shouted to Venora. Venora turned back towards the vast sea surrounding them, down at her legs, and smiled, satisfied in the decision she was about to make. "Did you not hear me?" Melody asked, stepping onto the ship, her legs transforming in front of the crew. Some of them have never seen this firsthand, and audible gasps could be heard all around them. "You don't want to do this, Melody. You know I'll destroy you," Venora whispered, so the other Mer in the water couldn't overhear. "If I don't do this, someone else will. What would you have me do?" "What exactly is about to happen here?" Swift asked, stepping cautiously between the two women. "We are about to battle," Melody responded, insulted that Swift is unaware of Mer law. "To the death," Venora added. Melody and Venora start making wide circles around each other on the deck of the ship while the men sit on the sidelines and watch. Just then lightning strikes in the distance and a loud howling sound can be heard overhead. All at once the Mers in the water look up frantically as if they know exactly what they heard and are afraid. Swift's men do the same, scrambling to hide. "What is that, sir?" Timbers asks Swift. "Amazon howlers," Melody answers, looking about her the best means of escape. "You do best to hide, human." "I don't take advice or orders from a mermaid," he replies, turning to Swift, awaiting his orders, just as a creature unlike anything he's ever seen swoops down upon them all. Timbers grabs Melody and pulls her to the ground with him, covering her with his body as the talons of the creature grazes at her arm, leaving behind three small gashes. Men, take cover, Swift shouts, unsheathing his sword and looking towards the sky. No, don't. Howlers are after Mers. I need to save them. Help me. There are too many of them, Venora says, pointing out in the distance. The men stay frozen in place, unsure of what they're seeing. The creature that was just there has brought dozens, all howling loudly. Venora runs to the side of the ship where the Mers are very frightened but not retreating. I order you to go home. Go now, she screams as the howlers get closer. You can get off me now, human, Melody says to Timber, who's still shielding her with his body. He moves out of her way as she stands. They won't leave without their queen, she says to Venora. And they won't. Venora removes her ring and, grabbing Melody's hand, puts it on her finger. It glows pink as its powers prepare to enter her. What have you done? Melody screams the last word in agony as she crouches, her ring glowing even brighter. All Mers, including Swift, who are wearing a pendant, notice it's glowing that same pink color. Don't fight it, Venora whispers into Melody's ear as she holds her in her arms. The howlers are now upon them, circling like vultures. Swift, protect us. She needs more time. He quickly springs into action. He and Timbers hand out swords and guns to the men. How do we kill them? He shouts to Venora. Fire, or cut their bloody head off. Everyone on the ship stops and stares at her in disbelief at her word choice. Ah! Melody screams as her eyes and mouth open wide, shooting the same pink glow into the sky. The howlers, knowing exactly what's going on, take this opportunity to kill as many mer as they can. They swoop down into the water, able to breathe able to breathe there, searching for the mermaids, who dove deep when they saw the howlers approaching. They vowed not to leave without their leader, knowing it will most likely lead to many of their deaths. From the ship, the crew is shooting at the howlers as they fly into the water. While they can breathe under there, it's not indefinitely. Eventually, they have to come up for air, and when they do, the pirates will be ready for them. Get ready, men. Be careful not to shoot a mermaid, Swift shouts, looking back to see what is happening to Melody, whose skin is beginning to glow pink now. Timber has been transfixed near her the entire time, not leaving her side. Timber, snap out of it. The men need you. A howler lands on the deck of the ship, its massive wings knocking some men down. The sound of claws carving into the wood underfoot as it walks towards Melody and Venora, still on the ground, gets Timber back into action, who unsheathes his sword and in one quick motion drives it through the howler's long neck before it can react. It dies instantly. Other howlers see what's happened and decide to try and land on the ship to avenge their fallen. The crew turn their attention towards the howlers overhead, just as Melody stands on her own, not exhibiting any signs of pain like she just had moments ago. In fact, the arm that had the gash on it from the howler is completely healed. She winks at Timber, who's struggling to remove his sword from the neck of the beast he just killed, causing him to drop it onto his foot. She then blinks once and her eyes glow pink as she raises both her arms in the air and pushes them upwards, causing wind to formulate and throw the howlers several hundred feet away. They get scared instantly and retreat. She then walks over to the side of the ship where other howlers can be seen picking apart several Mers who are obviously dead. Her rage builds as she motions her hands in their direction, and with her new power, she lifts the howlers out of the water, then closes her hands into fists that instantly snaps their neck. Venora steps forward and places her hand on Melody's shoulder to calm her rage. It's done, Melody. You can stop now. You did good. Melody drops the dozen howlers she just killed into the ocean, turns to Venora and hugs her tightly. Why did you do this? I can't rule like you, Melody cries into Venora's shoulder. I do not wish you to rule like I did. You have a pure heart still, not corrupted by man or by Mer yet. Rule as you want, and it will be the best way. I would not have given you the ring if I did not know it to be true, Venora says in a reassuring tone. We will be back to check on her, Melody says to Swift. She reaches into his shirt and yanks the pendant that is still glowing pink now and places it in Venora's hands. But if you should ever need me, you call me, she says, as she readies herself to dive into the ocean. You do know what love is, Swift spoke to Melody. Careful, human. I also know what hatred and revenge is, she replies, looking back at him with a menacing grin on her face. Then she was gone in the water, hardly the sound of a splash made. Vanora watches as her people she once ruled swim away. They would return often to the Leviathan to bring whatever food and provisions Vanora asked for. She would always be sure to ask for enough, not just for herself, but the others as well. After a while, Vanora became pregnant, causing Swift, for the first time since he arrived to this remote part of the vast ocean, to consider leaving. Being born on a ship was no way for any child to come into this world, but that night the dream that he only ever had once before he had again, only slightly different. He was preparing to leave for the sake of his unborn child, but once he did, he ran into his enemy, Captain Slade. They fought a great battle and swift loss. He and his crew were taken prisoner, while his wife, who could no longer transform into a mer, was taken as a personal sex slave to Captain Slade. Swift woke with such a fright, his wife sleeping soundly, a slight bump showing already. He would not do anything to risk his family. He would not stay right where he was forever. He would stay right where he was forever if he had to. But did Captain Slade come find Grandpa? Yes, son, he did. I was 12 years old. I need to give a mer name to the son, to Captain Slade's son. Said, cut off by his son's grasp. That's how old I'll be next week, his son said, looking around him in fear. You don't think Captain Slade will come for me, do you? You mustn't believe everything the other children tell you, son. Now, do you want to hear the rest of the story before bed? He asked his son, who nodded enthusiastically, his eyes wide with excitement. Grandpa killed that mean old Slade, didn't he? Yes, son, he killed him. And after hearing from Timber that a lot of his men didn't wish to stay on the Leviathan any longer, some of them having families of their own they left behind for the treasure, he let those who wished to go take Slade's ship along with his crew's survivors and leave. Was Grandpa all alone? He asked, really concerned. No, son, he wasn't. He had me and Mum. Timber stayed as well. Stayed till the end. Wow, Dad, I wish I could have met Grandpa, he said, his eyelids beginning to close. Sleep now, son. I have a surprise for you in the morning. The next morning, he was awoken by his son pouncing on him in the excitement. They're coming, Dad. Get up, get up. He sat up and smiled at his son, who ran out the room. He could still hear his excitement through the door as he got dressed, strapping his father's sword around his waist. He then went and joined his son, who was helping carry crates as best he could. Then she came on board. Hi, Melody. Did you know today's my birthday? I did actually, she replies, crouching down to his eye level. I have a birthday present for you. Really? His eyes widened with excitement. What is it? He asked, bouncing up and down. Patience, son. What have I taught you about patience? It's for the weak? I see he is learning from the best, Melody replies, chuckling a little to herself. The time that has passed since her encounter with Swift and becoming the leader of the Mer of Marinelle Bay has been long. When Vanora died of natural old age, a side effect of giving up her mer powers, Melody never stopped bringing food and supplies to the Leviathan. Okay, I think he's calmed down enough where you can give him his surprise, Swift's son says, winking at Melody, who smiles warmly back at him. Come with me, young man, she says, holding out her hand for him to take. He looks back at his father for assurance that it's okay, and he nods his head. Today I'm going to tell you why you could never swim with me in the saltwater ocean. The little boy turns to his dad, frowning about her idea of a surprise, and he laughs. Son, just hear her out. You're going to love this. Young man, you are half mer. Do you know what that means? You're kidding, he says, even more excited than he was before. Of course I know what that means. I have a fin like you. But he stops his excitement and starts to sulk. What's wrong? Melody asks him, not expecting this reaction. If a full mer can't come out of the water till they're 14, I bet a half mer has to wait even longer to get in the water, huh? Smart boy, Melody says, looking over at Swift's son. That's my surprise. You can enter the water on your 12th birthday, she answers, leading him to the side of the ship. She bends down to him and whispers in his ear. All you have to do is jump in. Don't be afraid. I promise you will be okay. Aren't you coming with me? He asks, a hint of worry in his voice. I can't. Not on your first dive. You have to learn to do it yourself. We'll be here watching you. Go on, she says, winking at him and smiling. He takes a deep breath and nods at her that he's ready. He closes his eyes and does a cannonball into the water, sending the mer that have been lounging around the ship, talking to each other, scattering in all directions. Melody leads against the rail of the ship, looking down at her son, whose legs are transforming into a fin. He's having so much fun, using it to splash water at the mer around him. His laugh is so infectious she finds herself laughing and doesn't notice when Swift's son stands next to her and puts his hand on hers. He has your father's energy and curiosity, she says to him when she looks down and sees his hand on hers. She takes it in hers and squeezes tightly. He has your love and heart, though, he replies back. Are you sure you're okay with him ruling the Mer of Marinelle Bay someday? Melody asks him. Yes, I won't have him trapped on this ship like me. He deserves to be free from this curse, and that ring will free him some day, he answers as a huge splash from in the water comes up and hits them both in the face, soaking them. Are you two gonna come in now or what? Of course, once he's ready, Swift's son says, picking up Melody in his arms and throwing her overboard, then diving in after her, all three of them splashing their fins at each other in the sun next to the Leviathan, where it is still anchored, as a warning to anyone who comes to look for the Isle of Whispers. The end.